Yesterday we talked about Angry Birds. Amazing, amazing story. Story of innovation, story of resilience, story of persistence. We want to take a quick moment here in this brief little uh, Twitter space, live feed, live stream. We're going to talk about one aspect that often gets overlooked. So today we're talking about earning big profits by owning your intellectual property, owning big profits by uh, owning your intellectual property. And what's very important about this, it's something that often gets overlooked. Because when we look at the story of Angry Birds, it's easy to look at the founders, the resilience, the 52 failures over a 6 year period before they landed on what worked. But what's less, I guess, clear is, you know, all the ways in which they were able to be successful. And one of those is through owning their intellectual property. So a lot of times we look at it, we can look at these types of companies, these stories, these case studies. It's just like one-offs. It's a one-trick pony. But the truth is that this company, I mean, they did it the right way. They built everything from the ground up, and they built it with a long view or long-term outcome in mind. So they actually turned, as they innovated, they started protecting intellectual property. So what that means, they're now bigger than just games. They're a huge company, like a $5 billion company. It's bigger than any other mobile games company in the world. And one of the things we're going to talk about, one sliver of that, which is IP ownership. If you go look into their company, you can see that they have a part of their company that's the brand licensing part of the company. And as it's grown, the percentage of that revenue generated by that company or that business unit has gone down. But essentially what we're saying is that IP ownership or intellectual property ownership of your concepts, your ideas is essential. When it comes to your owning your IP, you need to own everything. When I say everything, that means everything. That means everything from the brand, the characters, the story, the artwork, all the other elements that make up your IP. You know, because when all the components are owned by one party, then you can leverage that and license it out and generate revenue. So when we look at Angry Birds and Rovio, Angry Birds is not the only game that they own, number one, but it's the most popular and the biggest and the most profitable. At the same time, when you look at their intellectual property portfolio, what gets overlooked is they own all their IP, they own their artwork, they own their copyrights, so that the copyrights for the images of those Angry Birds, those are unique. People weren't drawing birds that look like circles or ovals before, and the concept, the way they draw the pigs, all their artwork is copywritten. They own that. They branded their language. They branded, they own their trademarks, which is the brand. So the words for Angry Birds, the logos, all the imagery, they trademark that, so that belongs to them. And then they've also they own the brand and their unique software processes. So you've probably heard, or maybe you don't know, that getting a software patent is not the simplest thing to do. And you can't just say, I have a new game, I want to get a patent on that game, which they didn't. They were unable to get a patent on Angry Birds, the game. But what they were able to do is their unique software processes, those algorithms, the way that their UI works, their user interface works, the way that they create gaming networks within social media platforms and other platforms. Their specific way is novel. They were able to, so they have over 48 patents and patent applications, domestically and internationally, protecting their intellectual property. So they own their IP. So what does that allow them to do? That allows them to go and commercialize and generate revenue by licensing it to others. Now, the cool thing about that is when you license things, you don't have to be the one to produce it. You're actually giving someone who's already a manufacturer. In this case, when you think of how they turned their IP ownership into a licensing gold mine, one of the things that they did, they are, if you look at, they now have movies, TV shows, they have characters, comic books, there's toys. So a toy manufacturer, they'll get a licensing agreement, and that means the toy manufacturer is going to invest and pay the cost of creating the toys, They're going to pay the cost of packaging and using their existing platforms to market, and Rovio gets paid because that company has to pay a licensing fee to them. So when you go to their website, you look at Rovio Investors, you can see, look at that. And right now in 2022, it's down some because Angry Birds, let's say, is not as big as it was, when the movies came out. But it's 3% right now, 3%. So 3% annual revenue out of $5 billion. 3% of that is just generated from them licensing their IP to others. And so this is, if you think of it in terms of business terms, this is like if you're buying something from a wholesaler, that's your cost. You do the marketing and you make the money or profit on top of that, but you have to pay the wholesaler. So in this case, the Rovio is a plug. They're the wholesaler. They're the ones that own the IP. And so these Hasbro toys or games or any of these companies that are already they just sell shirts, or they sell candy, or they sell toys. This is the toy flavor of the day. They pay Rovio a fee, and so part of their profits are built in, and they don't lift a finger. And so let's say it's approximately in 2021, the brand licensing unit accounted for approximately 3% of group revenue. And we think of over 2 billion Angry Birds consumer products have been sold since 2010. And they have in 2021, there are over 100 licensees globally for who use Angry Birds to just, their brand in various products or services. Additionally, there are 2 movies that have grossed over $500 million box office for the movie franchise. So this is telling you that all that, now that $500 million doesn't belong to Rovio, but they get part of that because they license their IP. So this is very important. This is and so what a takeaway is that it's not just an example of IP ownership. I mean, the story about Angry Birds, people talk about the 52 failures, the resilience, the learning through each of those 52 failures, how it led to what they needed to do to pivot, because Angry Birds initially was on the same nosedive as the other 51, and then they were able to implement what they had learned, and now they have a $5 billion company. And so what this also, if you apply the same resilience to intellectual property ownership, what they learned in those 52 failures, they pivoted and they learned to own the originality. So the original concept of Angry Birds was original. They said the artwork is original. Let's make sure we get the IP for that. They said the copyright. The language that we're using, Angry Birds, the descriptions, all our language in the game, let's make sure we protect that, we brand that. Our logos, our imagery, let's make sure we brand that. We own that with the trademark. And when it comes to their, looking at the technology, they said, well, what we've learned over these 52 failures, we have a unique way of producing games. We have a unique way of interacting with games on social media. We have a unique way. And so they look at, well, how can we map out this framework and make sure we capture that technological contribution? We know we can't, send the patent office a game, say, play our game, just give us a patent. But I can look at the technological framework and structure on, if we call it the front end, which is the game that we play, the back end, the technology behind the screen that's going on. They've patented, they have 48 plus patents and patent applications domestically and internationally. So it's a good example of how you innovate. It's a good example of how you innovate. And, this is not something that is new, owning your intellectual property, but I think for some of us it's overlooked. Think about it this way. You want to own the content that makes your company unique. Make sure you're owning the content that makes your company unique. So it's not just about owning the copyrights and trademarks, but the processes that make your company unique. In this case, they were able to reverse engineer what they did in a way that they could create a patent application or a series of applications to cover their unique processes in a way they could get a patent. So that's also creative and innovative. So it's about owning your brand and protecting it from being used by others without permission. It's also about owning your artwork so that you can use it on products with permission and use those, sell those products to generate revenue. So when you own it, this is just another avenue. if you don't own your IP, then this is dead in the water. Then imagine if they didn't own any of their IP and Angry Birds became the phenomenon it did, but they said, you know what? I've invested too much in these 52 failures. I'm going to quit. Who knows if it's going to be a hit? And it turned out to be a hit, but they didn't own their IP. How many bootleg, knockoffs of, products would have come out that they were lost market share because they didn't actually license their products. They weren't able to license. They weren't in a position to license their products. So this is something that's very important, and it's, like I said, it's often overlooked, but as a patent insider, that's our focus. So if you're a startup, if you're building a brand or you're building a business that's based on a brand, if you're building a social media business where you have your social media handles and hashtags or things that drive revenue and create a specific space, you want to own the content that makes your company unique. And I don't just mean own it by like saving it to a hard drive or to a server. I mean, you want to own it and protect it with intellectual property tools. You want to own your content with copyrights, your artwork, your original concepts. You want to protect your brand with a trademark. You want to own your unique processes and innovations with patents. You want to make sure that throughout your processes and internal processes in your company that you are actually you have a strategy for how you manage intellectual property and IP ownership. You want to have very clear, bright lines, agreements. You also want to have a strategy for, fortifying your IP assets. All these things we're talking about are intellectual property assets. They add value to your company. They have the potential to add value based on the performance. And then the second phase, you want to have a plan for how you enforce the rights and defend yourself against infringers. And what we talked about today mostly was commercialization. How do you get paid for owning your content and protecting it? How do you leverage that to get money that you're not even working for? Really, because you've owned the IP, you leverage that and let somebody else work for you and pay you for it. So with that, we'll close out. If we have any questions on Twitter, feel free to raise your hand. Any other listeners, if you have any comments, feel free to comment or join. We got about another minute here before we're out. Okay, no raised hands. Well, that's it. We want to thank you for joining us here at Patent Insider Secrets. Okay, hold on. We got a question. Yes, James.
Great presentation. Come from the film gaming world myself. Very clear, very clean. Look forward to your next presentation.
Oh, thanks, James. You have any questions?
No, not at all.
Okay.
Thanks.
You're welcome. Bye. All right, with that, see you next time. Patent Insider Secrets, Patent Insider Tidbits.